I'm attorney Martin Nicholson from the law office of Martin Nicholson, and I'm also known as the battery man for my focus on criminal and battery cases. And today I'm going to talk about, once again, things that I don't like, what I don't like. And what I don't like is governmental overreach. And the governmental overreach I'm talking about today is Trump trying to basically rewrite history. He has put on leave, or the head of the National African American Museum has resigned or departed. I don't know the full story there, but it sounds like there was some pressure from the Trump administration to remove him. And then there's been effort by the government to get in there and try to rewrite history, overreach, trying to minimize the impact of slavery and the contributions of African Americans. This is all part of American history. And now, I personally don't think that he can actually rewrite history, that he can erase history, because the history's already been written. And not only has it already been written, but people are actively writing it right now. There is so much that is going on as far as technology, that the actions he's taking now are being monitored and are being recorded. And even me saying this video here, these things will live on, and books have already been written, movies have been made, all this stuff has already happened that will make it virtually impossible, really, to rewrite history, except for those that want to get in there and believe slavery didn't exist, that if it did exist, the slaves were happy. And that is the problem that we see with governmental overreach. I have clients that call me and they will say, hey, I told the police the truth. I told the police this, I told them this, I told them that. And they said everything's going to be okay. And then I end up getting charged with a crime. Right. Because they were saying that to get you to give them information that they could use against you. Now, sometimes what the government does when people get in there and tell them things, trying to be helpful, is they will overreach. They will overreach and then overcharge, kind of like what I talked about in one of my other videos about what I didn't like. And so then they will get in there and try to dictate to people what they should do because they don't like what they're doing. And it's not necessarily that what the person is doing is a crime, but what it is they don't like it, so they're going to trump up some kind of charge to hit you with, or they're going to make things worse, follow you, say certain things to make you get upset. And then once you get upset, you end up saying something to them, or make a furtive movement or a threatening movement. And then next thing you know, they're saying, oh, but we had a tasing, we had a shooting, or her, whatever the case may be. Now, I know that's a lot different than what I was talking about in regards to this removal, resigning, departure, whatever you want to call it, of Director Kevin Young of the National African American Museum. But it goes to show you that when there are people in power, sometimes they will abuse that power. And with this directive, by trying to say that this museum is trying to make America about racism, look, people, America was founded on racism. People came over, the European countries came over to United States. It wasn't even called United States then. And they basically wiped out, massacred the Native Americans that were here because they were different. And that's what they did. It's a fact. And then they end up bringing over African American slaves who helped build this country. That's just a fact, and it was based entirely on race. And I get it. Not people nowadays say, oh, they're not slave owners and things. I get that. But there are people here that have benefited from slavery. There are people that are getting their privileges because of the historical fact of racism in this country. And there's people that are being held back and oppressed and abused and profiled because of that history. And that's the governmental overreach that I don't like. When they get in there and they start messing around in people's private business. You're going about your day trying to do the right thing, and then the government intrudes on it. African American History Museum trying to tell the story of African Americans and the contributions they've made and the sufferings they went through. And then yet the government comes in and says, you know what? No, you're not going to tell that story. You're not going to tell that story. And there are a lot of people talk about free speech and censorship. And they say, oh, Facebook removed my comment. That's a violation. I have free speech. Well, technically, and I won't talk too much about this, say that for another one, but Facebook is a private business, and it can essentially dictate what kind of speech it wants on its platform and whatnot. The First Amendment only really applies to the government, and government agencies should not be able to restrict your free speech except for certain instances. You can't get in there, yell a proverbial fire in a crowded building or a theater, or you can't say I want to kill somebody without suffering consequences. I guess technically you can say those things. You have free speech to say those things, but you guys just suffer the consequences for saying them, right? But people oftentimes get that mixed up with putting things on the internet, and things get taken down on the internet and say, hey, I have free speech. Free speech does not apply to these private businesses. It applies to the government. And so I feel like this is the government basically telling people that, you are not going to learn about your history, because we are afraid for people to learn about their history. And not only are we afraid for people to learn about the history, we also are sad. We're guilty. We feel guilty about it. We feel ashamed for what we did. So we don't want to get in there and remind people of that. But yet they want to remind people of 9/11. Never forget, right? Never forget. It's one thing for 9/11. And you have people in the South that get in there and fly the Confederate flag and say it's about Southern heritage and Southern history. Trump wants to say, make America great again. So he wants you to go back this history that he has, maybe when he was a child in the 1950s or something like that, that was all good for him. But there are also people that were suffering during those times because they didn't look like him. Right? And so think about that. They want you to think about all their history and learn about all their history, but forget about yours. Forget about our history. And all I'm saying is, I think it's important that people learn about all kinds of history. When I was in school, I had to learn about Greek history, European history. I've never been to Europe. I've never been to Greece. But I had to learn about those kind of things. There are a lot of things I learned about in school that I've never applied as an adult, didn't even have an interest in. So what's wrong with learning something about Black history? What's wrong with learning something about Asian history? What's wrong with learning something about Greek history, Greek mythology? We learn about Greek mythology, and that's even called mythology, but that's something that we learn about and teach about. So all I'm saying is, that's another thing I don't like. And if you like this, please like and subscribe. That's your Nicholson Nugget of the day.